Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are continuing the series where I play through The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and consider all the different potential changes we could see in an ambitious remake that many people now believe will be happening relatively soon, announced perhaps this summer, coming out for the holidays later this year. And we've already covered the beginning of the game, inside the Deku Tree, Hyrule Castle, Dodongo's Cavern, Zora's Domain, inside Jabu Jabu, getting to the Temple of Time, becoming an adult. But now we are actually embarking on the journey as an adult. And so what we're going to do is talk about acquiring Epona, going to Kakariko Village, acquiring the Hookshot, and the main focus being the Forest Temple. What kinds of changes make sense when we take a look back at all these parts to the game? That's what we're getting into today. So listen through, hear me out, and let me know what you think at the end of the video in the comments below. So immediately after you leave the Temple of Time, you're going to see that everything has changed. In the original, there isn't an immediate cutscene, you don't see a reaction by Navi. However, when you do go to Ganon's castle, where Hyrule Castle once was, there is a little bit of a scene that plays there where you do see a bit of a reaction, which is cool. But I do think there should be an immediate reaction, and I also think we should be hearing Navi respond to this. So I actually don't like it when Navi just randomly bothers you and stops the gameplay, and so I would prefer it if Navi never automatically just tells you something in the sense where you have to stop the gameplay and she's just telling you where to go next, where oftentimes you may already know where to go next, or perhaps you didn't want that to be spoiled, or you didn't want a hint yet Navi gives it to you. I want it to be the case where if you're looking for the advice, you have to manually choose a button that will allow you to speak to Navi in that way. However, I do think it would be cool if throughout the adventure, Navi, via voice acting, will talk as you're exploring around, in real time without stopping the flow of gameplay. I think that would be very cool. So as you're exploring around, you'll see different things, you might see a whole bunch of redeads, and you can hear Navi's response. Not constant, but a little bit of it here and there I think would add to the believability and would be very nice. Now, I also think that the very moment you leave the Temple of Time, there should be a cutscene that kind of shows Castle Town in its destroyed, dystopian, hellish-like form. Reminder of what we discussed a few episodes back when talking about changes we anticipate in Castle Town. This isn't going to be a whole bunch of pre-rendered environments where you can only explore areas from one set camera angle. It's going to be one fully rendered environment where you have your typical analog camera, so everything's going to be continuous, and so the moment you step out of the Temple of Time, your perspective would be very different. So I do think kind of having like a cutscene play showing off the new environment or the new form of Castle Town makes sense, and then you can explore about it, and you can hear Navi's takes as you kind of explore through here and there. Now, I did mention Ganon's castle, and I do like going there immediately, just to kind of see it. And what's interesting going back, if there are going to be substantial changes to this remake where we're going to have some Breath of the Wild-like mechanics, then we may be able to vault expanses in various ways. And so if that's actually made an option in this remake, if they are going that ambitious, then I do think they should probably create a larger gap between where Link can walk and the hovering Hyrule Castle. Like, it's not actually that sizable of a leap when we compare it to what we see in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. There are plenty of gaps like that where you can find a way to jump through in those games. Now, even if mechanically nothing like this has changed and so it's still not possible in the remake, I still think they should be adjusting the scale here just from an immersion perspective, because it doesn't seem like that much of a gap. But if we're going to be seeing a modern remake here, I do think the visuals should be redone, reimagined in a way where scale makes a lot more sense. Getting back to Hyrule Field, you'll see that occasionally you're going to be attacked by different Poes, which I do think does add a little bit to the idea that this is Ganon's new reign 7 years into the future. But beyond that, in Hyrule Field, there aren't any other changes. I would like to see some more changes to the environment that reflect the 7 years that have passed. Perhaps there's a few more ruins. We've discussed the possibility that maybe they'll be adding more to Hyrule Field in this remake, more characters to interact with, perhaps more buildings or houses or things of that nature, where there could be more side quests and such. Perhaps these additions, we could see certain changes reflected upon them 7 years into the future. And on that note, I wouldn't be against perhaps a little bit more of a hint to go towards Lon Lon Ranch earlier on to acquire Epona. Maybe Navi says something like, "Oh, I wonder how Milan and Epona are doing. Maybe we should check them out." Something subtle like that. Or perhaps Navi says, "Hey, maybe you need to get a horse so you can get past everything that's going on in Hyrule Field," assuming there are some drastic changes here. But getting to Lon Lon Ranch, even if there are no drastic changes, from a gameplay perspective, I still envision some subtle things that do make a lot of sense. For example, at night when you see Milan, you can hear her singing. In the original version, the audio is very simple. But in this modern remake, they would be redoing this entirely, I would imagine, and we probably would just kind of hear her singing through typical voice acting, but in a beautiful way. And so there's gonna probably need to be a lot of freedoms expressed here, a lot of changes to how she sounds and how she sings, which I imagine would be great to hear. Now, regarding changes to Lon Lon Ranch, there is a story of how Ingo took over the ranch and Talon got kicked out. I would like to see Nintendo dive deeper into that story, perhaps give us a little bit more. Even if this is a more tame remake, if we look at what Nintendo's doing with Star Fox, I do think it's actually somewhat reasonable to expect a little bit more added to the story elements here, where we can get a bit more background as to what's going on with the characters and the events. But all the core stuff of Lon Lon Ranch I actually want to remain pretty much the same, but there's one little thing that I think they could change. So when trying to acquire Epona, Ingo challenges you to a race, and you're supposed to place a wager for 50 rupees. If you don't have 50 rupees, you can't actually place the bet, but because it's a bet and not just a straight up purchase, I actually would love it if they allowed you to place the bet even if you didn't have the rupees. Now, what happens if you lose and you don't have the rupees? Then perhaps you get attacked. Maybe Ingo calls upon Ganon's forces and you get wiped out, something like that, so there should be a punishment for losing, but I do want to be able to still make that wager, because Ingo's not going to know how many rupees you have realistically. Beyond the events that transpire in Lon Lon Ranch though, I do want to talk about just the horse controls. Going back to Ocarina of Time horse controls, it feels really uncomfortable. There's a lot of little weird wonkiness there. That needs to be adjusted upon. It needs to be a lot easier to get onto your horse, angle around, stop, talk to people, turn corners, vaulting, all that stuff needs to be fixed up to meet modern standards and just feel a lot nicer to play. But when you do beat Ingo, as the race ends, he's still trying to push through. I imagine this is just because of the technology of the times, but in this modern remake, the moment the race ends, I want to see Ingo respond physically to the loss in that moment, not just in the cutscene that takes place immediately after. But eventually, once you get out of Lon Lon Ranch with Epona, it's sort of suggested that Epona has some pretty great abilities as a horse, and so I want to see this expressed more frequently. There are parts of Hyrule Field that I feel like Epona should have been able to jump over or vault over, but you can't in the original. In this remake, I want to see that, and I also envisioned that the Hyrule Field would actually be adjusted upon a little bit here, where it would be scaled up, so there might be a little bit more opportunity to do things like this. But even if it isn't, there are still parts where I think it would make sense if Epona could vault certain areas. Like there's this part that extends over this small little river between the main part of Hyrule Field and the area just before Kakariko Village. Epona should be able to jump over this part. But anyway, skipping to acquiring the hookshot, I don't really think there needs to be that much changed about all this, obviously better visuals. But one thought that does occur to me is that perhaps they should hire a voice actor for Dampé here. I've talked about how Milan seems kind of like a substantial character, and there are some cutscenes with Talon and Ingo as well, like those characters I think deserve to have voice acting. And I didn't realize it at first, but perhaps Dampé should also be one of those characters that has a little bit more of an elevated role in this remake, where there are some occasional cutscenes in the past, and obviously in the future as well with all the hookshot stuff. It would make sense. But getting back to Kokiri Forest, now that you're an adult, what I really loved about going back to this place is that you can actually tell how smaller it feels now that you are an adult. You're like twice the size as you once were. And so That sense of scale, that sense of being a lot bigger now and this world feeling a lot smaller, I hope that maintains. And so coming back to Kokiri Forest, when it was initially so bright and cheery, to see it overrun with all these enemies, that's going to be really cool to see that tonal shift as well. And so I hope they actually go a little bit deeper into that, perhaps show that things have been overgrown and become a little bit more wild, not just with more enemies, but just like with the plant life, it's no longer as controlled. But finally, getting to the Forest Temple, we meet up with Sheik. And this just occurred to me now, but when we're playing these songs, it's very quick. I actually wouldn't mind it if they were to expand on this and make it feel like kind of like a song playing minigame. Every time I play these songs, I only press a few quick little buttons. It leaves something to be desired, like to play the songs afterwards. It makes sense just to do those few buttons, that I understand, but for the initial learning phase where they play the song and they have this cutscene, they make it all special, I want them to flesh this out a little bit more, either with a minigame or just an expanded cutscene where we can enjoy what I'm going to assume is this remixed, reorchestrated, reimagined versions of these songs. Getting into the Forest Temple though, I think this is such a cool dungeon. It's one of my favorite dungeons in Zelda history, and part of it is just the atmosphere. It really has this eerie feel to it, and there's also this mystery, like what is this place? I would love it if there could be some details added in here that could give us a little bit more to chew on in terms of speculating about this history. It's this big building that's very castle-like in parts. What is going on with that? What is the history here? There are even paintings. When we see these paintings, I want to be able to see the texture of these paintings. Like, are they oil paintings? I want to see that level of detail here. We have the Poe sisters, they have their own names, and then there's Phantom Ganon as well. These are all ghosts. And so the implication is that this place is haunted because there are spirits here from a time long ago. Giving us a little bit more explanation as to the history of this place, I think would be really wonderful. And I don't mean like shoving in your face, but just adding some subtle details that we can find by exploring around. A little bit more lore is what I'm asking for here. And with this in mind, perhaps they should be expanding the dungeon a little bit, redesigning it in a way where it feels more like a believable mansion or castle where you can envision a history here. There are no dining rooms or bedrooms or anything like this, perhaps adding some things like that, or if this is a castle, perhaps areas where there are weapons. Actually redesign this environment in a way where we can see some of those details so we can start to fill in some of the gaps in terms of what took place here once upon a time. But something that finally happened to me in this playthrough, and I kind of let it happen, but when fighting Astolphos, I did run out of hearts, but of course I had a fairy to revive me, and that scene when the fairy revives you, how everything stops and there's like this extra lighting and it feels really epic. They really toned this down in future installments. I want them to keep this level of epicness and energy when the fairy is bringing you back in the remake here. Seeing that reimagined or remade would truly be wondrous, so fingers crossed they don't speed this up like in modern Zeldas. But a modern Zelda thing that I do want to see here is the ability to pick up arrows. You get the bow in this dungeon. When you shoot an arrow, you can see the arrow sometimes get stuck on walls. Like Breath and Tears, if you shoot an arrow and it hits the floor or what have you, or it's left behind, I want to have the option to go and pick it up. It just makes sense. Now, beyond that, I would like to see the hookshot utilized a little bit more, giving us more flexibility in terms of how we use the hookshot. So if they do redesign the dungeon in a way where there's more opportunity to take advantage of it, that would be very nice. Of course, that is assuming some significant changes to the dungeon. From a structural perspective, we shall see. And one other thing that if they did decide to go the extra mile here and give us more abilities and such, like whenever we actually get a medallion where we're supposed to get a power of the sage, perhaps with Saria's medallion, the Forest Temple medallion, we gain the ability to glide, kind of like what they do with the cuckoos, except maybe you can do it without the cuckoos in different areas. Something cool, fun, and subtle like that I don't think would be too crazy, but would add a little bit more and give you more options. But that's just a possibility if they do go that ambitious with the remake. And one final change I'll talk about here that makes sense, that I believe they will do. This is under the assumption the remake is not even that ambitious, just kind of like Star Fox remake level here, is redoing the cutscene when they explain what happens with Link's mother. Like, in this scene, when you meet the Deku Sprout, it's just text and some fire in the background. Like, maybe there should actually be some visuals with the king and the Civil War and the mother escaping and leaving young baby Link with the Deku Tree and the Kokiri. Depicting that with an actual scene could be far more powerful, so I honestly am expecting something more than just fire and some text. But what do you all think? What kinds of changes do you think make sense in the Forest Temple in an ambitious remake for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. If you've gone this far and you found yourself enjoying the video and you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, but I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.